The silence after the applause felt almost sacred, the kind that only follows a voice powerful enough to shake a room. For more than 60 years, that voice carried a group to 19 top 10 R&B hits, yet somehow, the world refused to give them the recognition they deserved. And standing at the heart of it all was a man whose sound didn't just fill a stage, it lifted souls. His glasses caught the spotlight like tiny stars. His steps were light, but his presence weighed heavy on every heart in the room. People didn't just hear him, they felt him, the way you feel a memory before it returns. Some said he sang with the precision of a horn, others swore his falsetto could break open the sky. But behind that brilliance was a childhood marked by separation, a journey carved through struggle, and a fate no one could have imagined. Before we talk about the music that shaped a generation, let me ask you something. What happens when the voice that carried millions couldn't carry itself to a peaceful end? This is the story behind that voice, its rise, its fall, and its echo that still lingers. He came into the world far from any spotlight, just a quiet hospital room in Cincinnati, Ohio, where a newborn boy took his first breath on April 3, 1941. No one there could have known that this child, born Felipe Walker, would one day shake concert halls with a voice people would swear was touched by heaven. But long before the music, long before the applause, life handed him a kind of loneliness that shapes a soul in ways talent alone never could. His earliest memories weren't of stages or microphones, but of hymns filling a family church. His grandparents sang with the kind of devotion that made every note feel like a prayer, and little Felipe followed along, trying to match their tone, their strength, their faith. In those days, music wasn't a dream, it was a comfort. A place where a child could feel held. But comfort doesn't last long in a broken home. When Felipe was still just a boy, his parents' marriage fell apart. His mother left for Detroit with another man, and the house that once held Sunday songs began to echo in new ways, emptier, sharper. His father, a hard-working construction contractor, did everything he could, but work kept him on the road. And so came the moment that shaped Felipe's heart forever. He and his siblings were taken to the new orphanage asylum for colored children. For 5 long years, he slept in a room with children who carried their own quiet stories. And he would later say the pain wasn't the cold beds or the strict rules, it was knowing both of his parents were still alive. That realization settles into a child's spirit like a shadow that never fully leaves. Eventually, Felipe and his brother Michael ran away. They were just kids, but they ran like men escaping a fire. Michael headed to Detroit to find their mother. Felipe stayed in Cincinnati, moving between relatives' homes, working odd jobs, growing up too fast in a world that kept demanding more of him. And then came the decision that would change everything. At just 15 years old, Felipe lied about his age and enlisted in the US Army. Somehow, the recruiters believed him. Suddenly the boy from Cincinnati was a soldier, facing infantry drills, artillery training, and eventually becoming a medical specialist. But even in uniform, even surrounded by routines and discipline, his heart pulled him back toward the one thing that had always felt like home, music. He boxed to stay sharp. He studied to earn his GED. But at night, he sang. And it was in the army that he crossed paths with a man whose music shaped a generation, Otis Redding. Felipe spent time singing with Otis's band, catching inspiration the way some men catch fire. You could say that was the first sign he was meant for something bigger. When he left the military after 7 years of service, he wasn't the lost boy from the orphanage anymore. He was a man with direction, and a voice people remembered. He joined his brother Michael in Detroit and formed a gospel group called the Walker Singers. For a while, the music lifted him again. But gospel didn't pay the bills, and life pushed him toward the rhythm of R&B, where the clubs were loud, the crowds were full, and the money was real. Back in Cincinnati, Destiny walked in wearing thick glasses and playing a bass guitar. Bootsy Collins, just a teenage genius at the time, and his brother Catfish had formed a band called the Pacemakers. They heard Felipe sing once, and that was it. They wanted him as their lead. It didn't take long before the Pacemakers found themselves inside King Record Studios, crossing paths with the godfather of soul himself, James Brown. And when James Brown saw the raw fire in those young musicians, he didn't hesitate. He hired them as the new JBs, his official backing band. Suddenly Felipe wasn't just singing background vocals, he was standing in the center of a musical revolution. The JBs helped ignite classics like Sex Machine, Superbad, and Soul Power, and Felipe soaked up every moment, every lesson, every stage light that landed on his face. But the James Brown world wasn't easy. The discipline was intense. The pressure enormous. And the accusations, especially toward Bootsy, pushed the young band too far. Eventually, they walked away. Felipe spent a season in Germany with a Liberian band called the Afro Kings, singing under foreign lights, earning foreign applause. But it was a call from back home that would pull him into the next chapter, a call that would carry his voice into history. Because a group from Detroit was searching. A group on the edge of transformation. A group the world would come to know as the Spinners. And they were about to meet the man who would change everything. There are moments in life when the right voice meets the right moment, and suddenly, history turns. For Felipe, that moment arrived when he walked into the room where the Spinners were waiting, a group already rich in harmony but missing a spark, a fire, a signature. What they needed wasn't just a singer. They needed someone unforgettable. And when Felipe began to sing, they knew. He wasn't loud. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He just delivered a sound that felt like silk sliding across gospel roots, a falsetto that rose clean, bright, and confident. Eddie Kendricks from The Temptations had already told them, "If you don't bring him in, you're crazy." G.C. Cameron, Felipe's own cousin, echoed the same. And so the door opened, a place was made, and a new era for the Spinners began. Leaving Motown had been a risk for the group. After all, Motown was the kingdom of polished stars. But Motown had overlooked them, focusing on bigger acts. And so, encouraged by Aretha Franklin herself, they walked toward Atlantic Records, where producer Tom Bell waited with a set of arrangements that would change soul music forever. Bell wasn't just a producer, he was a painter. And Felipe Wynne was the color he had been missing. Together with lyricist Linda Creed, Bell carved out the lush, elegant sound we now call Philadelphia soul, a sound that wrapped horns, strings, and rhythm around Felipe's voice like a tailored suit. It didn't take long before the world listened. When the 1973 album, The Spinners, dropped, the industry felt the ground shift. The first single, I'll Be Around, with the steady calm of Bobby Smith on lead, soared to the top of the R&B charts for 5 weeks. It sold over 1 million copies. Then came, Could It Be I'm Falling in Love, a duet of sorts between Bobby and Felipe, blending their tones like warm honey poured over smooth vinyl. That song climbed to number 4 on Billboard's pop chart and became a gold record. People began asking, who is that man hitting those notes? A nation was starting to recognize the sound of Felipe Win. The train didn't slow down. One-of-a-kind love affair hit number 1. The album soared. And suddenly, the Spinners were everywhere, in clubs, on radio, on television. They weren't just a group anymore. They were America's soul ambassadors. In 1974, the album Mighty Love lifted them even higher. The title track hit number 1 again, but it was songs like Love Don't Love Nobody that truly revealed Felipe's gift. The way he delivered a hurt-filled line made the older crowd nod in recognition. Love, regret, the kind of heartache felt deep in the ribs. He sang it not like a performer, but like a man who had lived every word. That same year, history placed them on another stage, the Rumble in the Jungle concert in Zaire, just before Muhammad Ali fought George Foreman. Under African night skies, with thousands cheering, Felipe sparred playfully with Ali backstage, two men with different talents but the same glow of destiny. The footage remains today, Ali grinning, Felipe throwing light jabs, laughter filling the air. Greatness recognizes greatness. But the momentum wasn't done. Late in 1974 came New and Improved, the album that featured a collaboration no one expected, Dionne Warwick. Together they recorded Then Came You, a song that shot straight to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, becoming Warwick's first ever chart-topping hit. The elegance of her voice, paired with the animated electricity of Felipe's, made it feel effortless, like two soaring birds catching the same wind. Yet among all their hits, there was one that stamped Felipe's name into the soul music stone, Sadie. He didn't just sing it, he lifted it. He shaped every vowel gently, like he was touching the memory of a woman he had loved. And audiences felt it in their chest, felt it in their eyes, rising as standing ovations night after night. On old footage, the crowd screams his name as soon as the opening chords play. It wasn't a performance. It was communion. Then came more hits. Games People Play, Smooth as a Late Summer Breeze. The Rubber Band Man, funky, joyful, and driven by Felipe's rhythmic style. It climbed to number 2 on Billboard's Hot 100 and became a Detroit anthem. Through these years, Felipe wasn't just singing, he was glowing. His high-stepping presence, his wide grin, the famous Coke bottle glasses catching the lights as he danced across the stage. It was clear, the boy from the orphanage had become the voice of a generation. But success is never just a celebration, it is a weight. And while the music soared, whispers began forming around Felipe, a familiar story in the industry. Why isn't he the star? Why doesn't the group carry his name? You don't need them. You can do this alone. It was the same temptation that had pulled David Ruffin from the Temptations, Diana Ross from the Supremes. And now, slowly, it crept toward Felipe Win. The glory years had crowned him. But the next chapter would test him in ways applause could never protect him from. Success is a beautiful thing from the outside. But from the inside, it can feel like a room with too many voices, some lifting you up, others pulling you away from the very people who helped you rise. For Felipe, the applause grew louder, but so did the whispers. Bit by bit, the industry began telling him he didn't belong with a group. He belonged in front of one. It wasn't long before those whispers hardened into advice. You should be the headliner. You're the one people come to see. Why is the group not called Felipe Wynne and the Spinners? It's a familiar echo in music history, one that had already reshaped groups like the Supremes and the Temptations. And now, it reached Felipe. A man who once found comfort in harmonies suddenly felt the pull of individual fame. The group sensed it. They had been here before with others who dreamed bigger than the collective. Still, they hoped Felipe would stay. They believed there was more to accomplish together. But the moment he asked to rename the group, the bond broke. The Spinners refused, not out of ego, but out of principle. They were a family, not a backing band. And so Felipe walked away. Leaving the group that carried him to worldwide acclaim might have seemed bold, even necessary. But for Felipe, it marked the beginning of a downward slope almost impossible to climb back up. He signed with Cotillion Records, still under the Atlantic umbrella, and released his first solo album, Starting All Over, a title that held more truth than he realized. The album came and went quietly, barely leaving a footprint on the charts. The world that once loved his voice seemed unsure how to embrace him alone. When the label dropped him, Felipe drifted back to familiar faces, Bootsy Collins and George Clinton. They welcomed him into the Parliament Funkadelic universe, where creativity was wild and experimentation was freedom. Felipe appeared on the iconic track, Not Just Knee Deep, a song that later shaped hip-hop's sampling and R&B grooves. It was a brief spark, a reminder of the brilliance still inside him. But sparks don't always turn into fire. He tried again, another label, Uncle Jam Records, another album, Wind Jamming. But once more, the world didn't catch on. By 1983, he had signed with Sugar Hill Records, a label known for early hip-hop, not soul singers. It was a sign of how far he had drifted from his center. And then came 1984. That summer, Felipe was performing at Ivy's, a club in Oakland, California. It was a small venue, about 200 people, but he treated it like a stadium. Audience members said he moved with the same high energy he had in his prime. They kept demanding encores. He kept giving them everything he had. 3 times they called him back out. 3 times he answered with a smile. During the final encore, he stepped into the crowd while singing Love Don't Love Nobody. For a moment, it seemed poetic, Felipe bringing one of his most emotional songs directly to the people. But then the music stopped. He dropped the microphone. His body gave out. And right there among the fans who adored him, he collapsed. A nurse and police officers in the audience rushed to his side. Some fans cried. Others prayed. They carried him out, hoping it was exhaustion, dehydration, anything but the truth. But an hour later, the hospital pronounced him gone. 43 years old. A voice that carried decades of soul silenced in a single night. What came after was perhaps even sadder. Only 8 people attended his funeral. 8. For a man who had stood in front of thousands, who had shaped the soundtrack of a generation, the quiet of that ceremony spoke louder than any applause ever could. Fame had lifted him high, but life had left him painfully alone. And tragedy didn't stop with him. Felipe had 2 sons, both gone too soon. His son Alvarez was killed in a drive-by shooting in Compton in 1999. A year later, his other son Emmanuel drowned while saving another man's life. Emmanuel received the Carnegie Medal for his bravery, but medals don't fill the empty space left behind. 2 sons gone. A father long gone before them. A family line touched by talent and tragedy in equal measure. Meanwhile, the Spinners continued performing, reshaping themselves through the years with new voices and new members. Only Henry Fambrau remains from the original lineup, carrying the weight of the group's history on his shoulders. They earned their star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame back in 1976 and entered the Vocal Group Hall of Fame in 1999. But for many fans, the story will always circle back to the man with the shimmering glasses and a falsetto carved from pure emotion. Felipe Wynne lived fast, sang hard, loved his audience, and left too soon. And even now, the question lingers. How does someone so gifted, so essential to a group's success, end up facing the end of his life almost alone? The story of Felipe Wynne is more than the rise and fall of a single artist. It's a reflection of how America remembers, and sometimes forgets, the voices that shaped its soundtrack. In the United States, especially among older listeners who lived through the golden age of soul, the Spinners are still spoken of with warmth. Their harmonies lived on radios, in barbershops, in kitchens on Sunday mornings. And when people talk about those songs, Felipe's falsetto is the memory that rises first. Yet despite their impact, 19 top 10 R&B hits, decades of touring, and a sound instantly recognized by anyone who lived through the 70s, the group remained overlooked by institutions that claimed to preserve musical history. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame denied them year after year. For many fans, especially black listeners who grew up with their music, this feels like an injustice, a reminder of how often black artistry is celebrated in life but minimized in legacy. Internationally, the picture looks different. In Europe, particularly in the UK and parts of Germany, soul collectors and vinyl historians treat the Spinners as royalty. Their Philadelphia-era sound is studied, admired, archived. Felipe's performances on tracks like Sadie, Could It Be I'm Falling in Love, and The Rubber Band Man are considered masterclasses in emotional control. To those listeners, he isn't just a singer, he's a standard. But back home, the silence around Felipe's death, and the nearly empty funeral, left a wound that still troubles many who revisit his story today. It raises difficult questions about celebrity, community, and what it means to protect our cultural heroes before it's too late. Older American audiences, hearing his story again, often respond with a mix of nostalgia and guilt, remembering how bright he once shined, and wondering how that light faded with so little notice. Even now, as the Spinners continue touring with new members and only one original voice left, fans talk about the era that cannot be recreated, the years when Felipe Wynne stood at the microphone, glasses sparkling under the stage lights, singing as if every note carried a piece of his past. His talent was celebrated. His influence was undeniable. But the world's memory, that has been uneven. And that, too, is part of his story. There are artists whose names fade over time, and then there are voices that linger long after the spotlight moves on. Felipe Wynne belonged to the second kind. Even though his final years were marked by struggle, and his final moments were met with heartbreak, the sound he left behind still moves through American memory like a warm current. Every note he sang carried pieces of a childhood shaped by hardship, a youth spent searching, and a life poured into music with everything he had. For the Spinners, the years with Felipe became the foundation of their greatest legacy. Those harmonies, those melodies, the unmistakable Philadelphia soul sound, they were built not just from talent, but from a rare chemistry between men who understood one another. And even as the lineup changed, and time carried most of the original members away, the group continued touring, offering audiences a bridge back to the songs that once filled their living rooms and long drives. But Felipe's story leaves something deeper behind, a reminder of how fragile recognition can be. A group that defined an era still waits for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. A man who sold out arenas was laid to rest with only a handful of people by his side. And yet, when their music plays, whether it's Sadie, Could It Be I'm Falling in Love, or The Rubber Band Man, the room shifts. Listeners pause. Memories surface. Time folds. Maybe that is the truest measure of legacy, not the awards, not the headlines, but the way a song reaches us years later, carrying us back to who we were when we first heard it. If this story touched something in you, maybe a memory, maybe a song your parents played, maybe a moment of your own, feel free to share it below. Stories like his last longer when people who remember choose to speak. And if you want to keep exploring the lives behind the music that shaped America, consider joining us here. There are more voices worth remembering. More stories worth keeping alive.